All right, so we start with networking fundamentals. First thing to say is that now that cyber warfare is the fifth domain of battle. You know that in traditional war there were 4 domains, but since 2011, Pentagon called that cyber warfare is the fifth domain. NATO officially recognizes cyberspace a warfare domain since 2016. So recall that land, sea, air, and space are the well-known ones, but now the information is now the fifth domain battle. So a good example would be the Stuxnet virus. If you don't have any idea about it, there's a very nice Wired article about it. But it was a virus that specifically designed and damaged the NATO's nuclear facility of Iran. So if you want to delay the nuclear research of a country, you can attack the building physically, but it will cause a war. But if you design such a virus and keep your identity secret, you can cause such a damage and and avoid an obvious war. So this is why it is important that actually now almost every country has a team of hackers trying to gather as much information as possible, but also damage other countries. So there's a well-known security threat called CIA. So let's talk about this abbreviation first. Threats may influence a system in multiple ways. So C stands for confidentiality. Confidentiality says that the system ensures that only authorized parties can view assets. Integrity, the system ensures that only authorized parties can modify assets. And availability, the system ensures that all authorized parties can use and access assets. So the CIA threat can be considered as desirable system properties of an information system. And these definitions depend a lot on the context. So let's start with confidentiality. We said that the system ensures that only authorized parties can view assets. It is the avoidance of unauthorized disclosure of information. Confidentiality involves the protection of data, provide access for those who are allowed to see it, while disallowing others from learning anything about its content. So, as you might guess, the solution to this problem will mostly come from cryptography, because if we can encrypt data in a proper way, this way, if the data leaks, your information will not leak because it will be encrypted, and also the authorized parties will have the secret key to decrypt the data. So most of the time, cryptography will solve this problem, and we will see many examples. And here, yes, tools for providing confidentiality, encryption, access control, identification and authentication, authorization, and physical security. And this part is actually sometimes overlooked. This is really, really important because, for instance, we will talk about Advanced Encryption Standard, AES, which is almost the whole world uses this encryption algorithm to encrypt data. So since theoretically the algorithm is good and we cannot break it, people think that implementing on small devices will be enough for confidentiality. But when you have a physical access to a device, even if the algorithm you use there is secure, you can physically obtain more data. And in some cases, you can actually break AES if you have physical access. So in this scenario, you don't break the algorithm itself, you actually break the implementation. So we call this kind of attack side channel attacks, and it is really, really important. So you have to be careful about the physical security. For instance, if you are using your mobile phone, you might think that it is in your pocket, so physically nobody can reach it. But if you put an IoT device on the field, a sensor or a camera or anything, or if you build a device like smart cards or PlayStations and so on, you are actually giving the hardware to the consumer, so they have physical access. So you have to talk about different kind of security there. All right, let's move on to integrity. The property that information has not been altered in an unauthorized way. So Actually, we will talk about hash functions, and I will give a different definition there, but integrity and availability are difficult to measure. Integrity is in degrees rather than being binary. Integrity and availability are context dependent. Their meaning change under different circumstances. So this is important because in cryptography, by integrity, we mean that the original content is not altered. And actually, if we use hash functions, we can easily detect if the content is modified. So we will see message authentication codes or authenticated encryption to detect this kind of integrity in data. But in this sense, in the network security, the definition of integrity is somewhat broader. So this is why we say that it is in degrees and difficult to measure and so on. So tools for integrity, you can use backups. This way, if something happens, you can always go back to your last backup, but you will lose mostly the data between since you took the backup and since the data is lost. Checksums, just to check to find some problems. Hashes, and here cryptographic hashes are different than checksums because people think they are the same. But actually, for a cryptographic hash function, we want more properties like collision resistance and so on. So they're not the same. Also, we have error detection and correction codes, which actually we use in the background without knowing it in all of our communication. Actually, there are some error detection and correction is happening thanks to coding theory. This is really good. So this is why we have stable Wi-Fi communication or GSM communication and so on. And finally, availability. The property that information is accessible and modifiable in a timely fashion by those authorized to do so. This is important, and this is actually where generally the previous problems cryptography can be used, but in this one, actually, there isn't much you can do with cryptography. So you have to come up with some other measures. So physical protections, infrastructure meant to keep information available even in the event of physical challenges, for example, natural disasters such as earthquake and flood. So this is what we talked about last week. I gave a short talk about networks in time of war and during natural disasters. So you should have some physical protection so that even if a huge earthquake occurs, you still have the communication lines available. So this is what we lacked during the Kahramanmaraş earthquakes in 6th of February in this year 2023. So for a few days we didn't have GSM communication, which is actually not acceptable because it affected a huge area like 10 cities. And you should have communication channels to, help the people affected by the earthquake. So this is why availability is really important, and you should have many scenarios for unexpected events. So in normal, under normal conditions, everything works, but you have to be prepared for unexpected occurrences. Computational redundancies, computers and storage devices that serve as fallbacks in the case of failures. So again, you can have, for case of computers, you can have mirror servers, or you can have many backups and so on. In the case of, again, for the physical protections, for instance, instead, if you need 1000 base stations for a city to have GSM communication, you can have just 1200 as redundancies, because if some of them fail during an earthquake or so on, you still have communication. Of course, you should also think about this for electricity and so on, not only for computational devices. So below are some sample measures for availability. The system returns timely request responses. So this is what we are going to talk about in denial of service attack. So under some conditions, if you attack a server and consume its resources, a regular user might try to reach it, and the system here's the person's request, but since the server is overloaded, it returns requests not in a timely fashion. So in the denial of service attacks or distributed denial of service attacks, this is what we are going to focus. But also, here you should also think about implementation and so on, because I'm not going to give the name of the company, but in Turkey, I once learned that for physical access to building or the important rooms, people were using their ID cards, smart cards to open the doors. But it turned out that the software running in the background was not implemented in a fast programming language like C. And some public key encryption algorithms take some time to, for the computations. So people put their smart card to door and wait like 5 or 6 seconds to door to open. So, I mean, you might say that 5 or 6 seconds is not that long, but, it is kind of weird, just you put your smart card and, just wait for a few seconds so that it performs computation. So this is also important. So you have to design the system so that it doesn't do redundant operations. You can see this kind of things in new websites. For instance, Facebook is around for a very long time, and you might think that the appearance is almost the same, so nothing might change. But actually, if you try to visit Facebook with an old computer, sometimes it takes a few minutes for the whole page to load, because it does too many computations, and older CPUs cannot cache this. The system allocates resources fairly. This is what I've been talking about, actually. The system is fault tolerant, otherwise a total breakdown would reduce availability. This is also important, and this is also a little bit about physical precautions. A small fault shouldn't, break down the system. The system is easy to use to reach the asset in a timely manner. This is also important. It should be also user-friendly. The system handles concurrencies, for example, multiple users accessing the same asset. This is also important. And this is what you actually faced 2 weeks ago when you wanted to register for courses. We have maybe 20,000 students or 30,000, I don't know, but that amount is not a huge amount to break down a system. So, I mean, some web pages, even my own web page can serve more than 1 million person in a very short time. But to avoid this, since you are graduate students, you have to wait until afternoon to register for courses, where undergraduate students can register in the morning to to handle the concurrencies. But actually this is about the problem here. The system allocates resources fairly. There it is not in a optimized way, so this is why you were facing that problem. So availability is, as you can see, are kind of hard to measure, but these are some examples that you can use to measure the availability.